Programme sound.
As all committee members' meetings are held in open session and recorded, and the mobiles may interfere with the recording system, and possibly if we're hoping to land the plane at any stage today. I'd also remind members of your ongoing obligation to declare any relevant financial or other interests in relation to today's business, and remind members to keep the volume on your tablet devices off. Apologies. I'll ask, first of all, apology thing from the Vice Chair, Danny Kinahan. Do we have any other apologies? If not, then we will move on to the Chairperson's business. And obviously the first item, the more observant of you who've woken up today will observe that I am not Michelle McIlveen, who is now a junior minister. But obviously I appreciate and I look forward to working with. Sorry?
It's the glasses.
Well, I think she's got glasses now as well, but
Oh, that was the giveaway.
It's the giveaway indeed. From that point of view, I look forward to working with the committee members and appreciate that I've got large shoes to fill, although not as a couple of people suggest on the social media stilettos to fill in that regard. But members, I think, could I just seek your agreement first of all? I think we should, as a committee, write to our outgoing chair, thank her for her work and wish her the best in her new role. I presume members are agreed with that?
Agreed.
Okay, I have a number of other items then of Chairperson's business. There's a tabled correspondence for members to the there's correspondence from the department in relation to delays to the redundancy process. Now, those figures indicate that there have been 206 redundancy applications for the teaching side, which the target is 500, and 54 non-teaching redundancy applications, which the target of 1,000. Now, understand before. In relation to this, I think we're due, I'll now bring in the clerk at this point, that I think we are due to receive additional information from the department, hopefully either today or the next couple of days.
Yes, Chair, just as you say, the department contacted us on just yesterday evening to indicate that since the Minister signed off that letter, there's a further update. But I think as you've indicated, the numbers are much lower than the target or the expectation. The committee had written to the department expressing concerns about this and timescales, etc. previously. Chair.
Okay. I mean, obviously, we do have the figures at the moment, notwithstanding any update we get, are quite worrying. Additionally, I remind members as well that this is not probably in the same position perhaps as other departments, because particularly as regards to teaching staff, they have to be given 3 months' notice of redundancies that are planned for the 1st of September, and thus teachers who are applying for redundancy must be informed by the 1st of June, so any level of delay will have serious consequences. And I think that unless we get a situation where access to the Central Redundancy Fund is not confirmed soon, it's got to be presumed that the Department will be unable to confirm teacher redundancies planned for the 1st of September, certainly within the necessary timescale. I think we need to probably write, and suggest that we write to the Department to confirm the position. Obviously, as we're getting more information, but within that, provision of notice of teachers regarding redundancy and seeking clarity in respect of the impact on schools' budget. It's not obviously simply for the individual teachers or the department, but obviously schools may well have worked out on a level of assumption of where redundancies might appear. So, has the committee agreed with that? Okay. And then, depending on the response, we can decide then what next steps we need to take. Right. I understand then that some members of the committee met with the Home Education Northern Ireland, and I'm hoping to meet with them soon myself on the 12th of May in order to discuss elective education. There are table papers from Hedney provided for your information. Trevor?
Only if you want me to say something about that meeting.
No, it may be useful, because I appreciate certainly.
Yeah.
There's too short notes for myself and maybe others as well who weren't able to.
Well, I don't know. I can't speak for the other two who managed to make it, but I find it quite interesting and revealing. You know, the problems they have. I think that the home education has been allowed to flourish as a small segment of the system without any real interference or regulation or supervision. And I can see it seems as if the Minister now wants to introduce a level of, certainly, I wouldn't call it supervision, but maybe an annual visit to home where home education is taking place. The organisation is very unhappy about that because they can't really see the legal basis for it. Hasn't been up to now, and there doesn't appear to be a change in the law to make it so. It's the parents' responsibility, according to them, to provide the education, not the board or the department. I suppose where the point of friction would be is to what extent does the board and the department have an obligation to make sure it's actually happening. At the moment, I think I made the point to them that children going to school, if there is a problem, and they're saying a very small number of cases there could be a problem, if they're attending a school, they can, these things may be spotted, identified. I think they would make the point that there's probably far more cases pro rata identified in children who are at school than those who are not. I'm not sure where we go with it. I'm not sure what the committee's attitude would be to it, but
Well, I suppose
but at the moment it's down to social services.
yeah, initial, but I mean, just in terms of how this is moving forward, I mean, would it be worthwhile at least to write to the department and get, again, I appreciate this is maybe something that's been dealt with sort of in the past, but to get a wee bit of clarification as to precisely how they intend to take this forward.
Yeah, I think on the back of all the information they gave us yesterday, and you'll all have it now, it might be worthwhile to set up another presentation from the department and we can ask them relevant questions.
Okay, would it be, is that members who think that would be a helpful thing to do?
For members' information, as members may or may not recall, the boards launched a consultation on the relevant guidance that the member mentioned about a year ago. And the committee has been seeking a briefing from the boards and more lately the Education Authority. And they contacted me yesterday to indicate that they want to come in either the first or the second week of June. So if members are still very interested in this subject,
Okay, we can arrange that then for the first or second
And
meeting.
I'm glad to hear that'll be well worthwhile.
Okay. One other sort of item of Chairman's business, remind members in terms of Strontown Primary that the committee had previously written to the Belfast Board in respect of the issue of oversubscription in the Strontown Primary. Yes, Robin?
Chair, along with some other members of the Assembly, I met with the principal of Strontown and the principal of Dundela on yesterday, and there is a concern with what is in fact 4 schools, that a long-standing relationship of 3 schools acting as a feeder school to Strontown School is being looked at by what replaces the BELB, the area board, as we call it now, with a view to, one can only imagine, changing the arrangements. I have to say, Chair, whilst what happens between the 3 feeder schools in Strontown is a unique relationship, it was at one stage common across Northern Ireland to have a similar relationship between schools. Were the principals and certainly parents and elected representatives find it difficult to understand what is a very successful relationship, very popular relationship, is being looked at, and for the purpose of some form of change, gives the parents, teachers and elected representatives some cause for concern. I just wonder, Chair, if maybe at some stage we could clarify for the committee what...
Well, I think it may be useful from that point of view. I mean, perhaps we could write, given that we've now moved from a transition period of the Belfast Board looking after this issue to the wider Education Authority will be responsibility. Now, that's obviously a sort of a new bailiwick in that regard, but it may be useful if we were to write to them seeking that level of clarification. But members happy enough with that? Okay, that's all the Chairman's business I have. I'll move on then to the draft minutes of the meeting on the 29th of April. It's at page 6 in your papers. Can I seek members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of the meeting? Are members agreed? Okay, I'll sign. Thank you. Okay, under matters arising, I have a couple of matters arising here. First of all, the shared and integrated education inquiry. There's Clerk's cover note at page 14, which I refer you to, and correspondence from the Department regarding the Committee's inquiry, which encloses a copy of the 2012 Young Life and Times survey. Can I get members' agreement to note this correspondence and add it to the submissions? Members are agreed? Okay. Then also it's in terms of the SEND bill, which will be obviously the next major item of legislation that's coming towards the committee. Additional written submissions have been received as part of the committee stage of the Special Education Needs and Disabilities Bill, and these can be found via the SkyDrive Pro link. For those of you who are technologically minded, at that point I think Trevor himself is even more worried at this point. But
No, I have it all.
can we just get agreement as regards all these submissions to publish those on the committee's webpage? Members agreed? Okay. Whenever we get to the oral evidence sessions, which will commence next week, I think the clerk will provide us with a summary of the written evidence, and that will, I suppose, give us a sort of a wider context. Now, in terms of then moving on to the next item, which is correspondence, there's a wide range of correspondence, 20 items in your main pack and 2 tabled items. I'm going to highlight a few here, and then I'll put it open to any other committee members wants to highlight. First of all, at 5.4, the Book Trust funding, which is at page 53, and there's confirmation from the Department confirming that £250,000 of funding for the Book Trust Book Start programme ended in 2014-15. Obviously, we've got, there's been mention of it, I think, today in the news, with the June monitoring round coming up. Maybe seek agreement to write to the Department suggesting it seeks maybe at least £125,000 of funding in the June monitoring round. Would members be agreeable to that?
Chair, where that figure came from was the Book Trust actually informally wrote to I think the previous chair, and indeed just copied to the clerk, saying that they'd asked the department for this amount of money. It's just in financial terms, members will appreciate it's buttons, but I think members had indicated previously that they, and I think the Minister had also indicated some attachment, some concern about this particular programme.
Okay, Trevor?
If we're going to write to the Minister on specific items for inclusion in the consideration in the monitoring round, and I have nothing whatsoever against the Book Trust. It's a very worthy and very necessary scheme, but so is the funding to Sentinels, and so is the funding for primary school languages education. Now, if I had to prioritise them, I don't know which one I would prioritise. So I wonder, is there virtue in
Well, perhaps at the very least, could we seek clarification as to whether they intend to make a bid, at least on those items across the board, and that bit maybe in the hands of the committee, just as what way they want to take this forward.
It would be a good indicator for the Minister if the committee was able to make a firm suggestion that, if there is such a thing, that one of these items should be prioritised. In my opinion, the primary school languages thing has been running for 7 or 8 years. It's recognised internationally, I've said all this before, as a very valuable thing for primary school kids to learn a second language. If somebody had suggested 2 years ago it should be cut when money was around, the Minister would have said, no way, this is far too valuable to cut. And now here it is, it's not just being reduced, it's being cut out completely. There's no longer any supplementary funding for tuition.
Bring in Chris.
Yeah, again, I take Trevor's point, although there's some concern on, as a committee, how do we evaluate what is good spend and what is not. There are others in the department who are, employed directly to do that. Just on the primary languages, and this is one that's a motive perhaps, but we haven't seen an uptake in languages at school as you might think, given that this primary modern languages has been in place, so, yes, I get it, the media and everything else, and we look and think, we should be keeping this money. But if it's not doing what it's saying on the outside of the tin, well then, that's what we need to look at as well as everything else. So I don't know if we're best placed to make the calls and what should be prioritised and what should be not. Certainly we want to
Well, at the very least, one element of things, I think we should be seeking information from the department. We've got a situation that the Book Start has been mentioned, obviously the primary school languages. I think we need to get clarification really from the department, I suppose very specifically as regards those two items, but more generally, if we're looking at a monitoring round, what it sees as the priorities for the monitoring round, and if we can get a little bit of feedback from that as to how they intend to prioritise it, I think that would be helpful. From this point of view.
Are we going to mention specific programmes?
I think we could mention Saints, the two that have been, well, the ones that sent us, yeah, and that sort of things, but also then the Book Start as well, and see particularly there would be, shall we say, sympathy from the committee as regards those.
That would be it.
Okay.
I think, Chair,
Yes,
it is important to reflect on the Minister's comments yesterday in regard to the early years funding generally.
Yes.
And that he did indicate yesterday, maybe we seek that clarification, that in going forward, that early years would be a priority.
Yes, I think one of the other things is that at the moment it's been mentioned, has been made that the Minister has the report, if you like, on the operational side of things as well. I think it's also important that whatever therefore is being targeted, particularly at early years, that's obviously a crucial area, but also ensuring that I think it was highlighted even by the Minister as well, that we get the best value for that and the most efficient use of that. So I think it's also important to see how that operates within that side of things as well. But I don't think there'll be any dissent from saying that early years intervention is critical within education.
I think just on the,
Yes,
Chair, on the early years issue, there are some early years provisions that will just disappear, and it's finding the ability to fund the appropriate.
Yeah, and it's also, I suppose, whatever money is there, trying to ensure that, for instance, the criteria is got right, so that if it does, for example, at certain times come to a choice between either individuals or indeed between particular projects, that we're getting best possible value for that side of things. Yeah. Okay, folks, so if we're agreed on that, then next item I want to highlight just is 5.9, which is at page 75 on GCSE and A levels. TCEA has responded to the committee queries regarding GCSE specifications, changes, and GCSE and A level approval. Now, indication CCEA has advised that from September 2015, GCSE English and A level science offered by AQA, OCR and Pearson will no longer be available to schools in Northern Ireland. I'd met actually yesterday separately with the CCEA, maybe a bit more of a nuanced position to that. I think it'd be a fair comment to say. And obviously this, if those were to move ahead, that would have some level of impact on people. Can we perhaps seek agreement to write to the department seeking clarity on the impact of delays to the GCSE specification programme and see just what impact that will have on schools? Because I'm not even just quite clear that it's just as clear cut as what has been said. Yes, Chris.
Sure. I'm not sure if we had or due to have a briefing, even a written briefing from SIA soon around changes made to some of these qualifications and the rationale behind it. I know I've spoken lately to a couple of teachers actually, and they seemed unbeknown to why changes were being made. Didn't understand why. I thought English was going to suffer as a result, their English in particular. I think
there is a sort of, as I said, a slightly more complex picture, so I think it might be useful to have from SIA, because obviously a couple of other issues, which also brings on to, I suppose, a sort of SIA-related issue, which is the next item in the correspondence. I think we can all agree then bring SIA in front of us at probably some stage in June. Right. SIA has also responded to committee queries regarding levels of progression. SIA continues to offer training in around 1/6 of schools have submitted level of progression portfolios. Now, I know SIA, I think, want to take this in a particular direction, and obviously there seems to be an issue where there's a little bit of impasse at present. One of the areas I think there has been some concern over whether shared education funding for schools is going to be contingent on participation of the levels of progression, and I suggest if we can write to the department to get clarification on that. But it may also be that, in light of the fact, I know it's the funding issue is really for the department rather than SIA. If we have SIA coming before us, I think their again, the position on levels of progression is not as clear-cut perhaps as it appears, and I think they may have useful information to give us on that as well, so that may be something we could look at. I'll indicate that there's an invitation from Stranmillis University College. I'll be happy to accept that, just for the record. Other items that I have at 5.16, which is the ETI role in the training inspectorate in relation to development proposals. The committee made queries re their sort of role in development proposals. The department advises that its guidance to EDI on recommendations relating to development proposals has been changed. EDI can support development proposals where access to the curriculum or opportunities for teachers or where school finances are improved. EDI cannot support development proposals which may displace existing provision. Now, obviously it's indication if the department has indicated that it is providing some level of revision to the guidance, it may be sort of useful to get an explanation from the department, at least in written form, first of all, as to what the revision is and sort of what the reasons behind that. Would members be happy to write to the department on that? Okay. Right. Then I have two other items that I wish to raise, both of which are in the table papers. At 5.21, which is on page 135, and also in the table papers, on the European Studies Programme. Advise members of a revised version in the table papers of the response to the committee's queries regarding the European Studies Programme. The Department has confirmed that £165,000 of funding has been discontinued owing to the sort of budget pressures, but also owing to participating schools not focusing on the cross-border element of the programme. Now, members want to note the correspondence, or is there any other action? I think yes, the silence is signifying either consent or suggesting that you haven't actually read that particular one. Right, 5.22, invitation from the Dell Committee, the further education event. There's an invitation from the Committee of Employment and Learning to colleges NI on the Long Gallery at lunchtime on the 19th of May. Obviously, there's opportunity for any members to attend that. Is that right?
Absolutely, Chair, yes.
Okay, so we note that. Okay, as regards that, those are the items that I wish to raise under correspondence to the Chair. Does anybody else have any other correspondence items? Yes, Trevor.
Not sure what item it is, but it's page 61, the one about the BT Young Scientist competition. A number of us went down to this last January, and I think we're all mighty impressed. We've asked the Minister if we've been in prayer will he continue to support and so on, but I see that they've actually had their launch in Belfast City Centre just before the election, 29th of April. I don't think they told us about that, but
I found out about it afterwards. They wrote
yeah,
to me to
but
say
it's
that they'd
nice to
done
know
it.
they had a good day. It might have been better to get a chance to attend it, you know. But anyway, the feeling when we discussed this before was that is there any way that the committee could help to spread the good word about this across Northern Ireland schools, because the representation from Northern Ireland compared to the Republic is poor in percentage terms, but the actual achievement, the success rate from Northern Ireland schools is the opposite, and it's above the average, well above the average. And but there does seem to be an indifference around a lot of schools. I wouldn't like to say particular sectors, but it may be so, not to participate. And anybody who attended it, others can speak, you know, that really the enthusiasm and the achievement of the children at that thing had to be seen to be believed. It was marvellous. I wonder if there's any way we can...
I mean, is there anything, just by way of even... appreciate it was one of the side complications is we're effectively a fortnight after the launch, but whether or not even as the committee can put out a statement to welcome it, to encourage involvement within this within schools, or are there any other particular sort of concrete ways you think?
Could we perhaps write to the department and ask them to try and prioritise it in some way to make sure that every school
help sort of publicise
knows a lot more detail about it, perhaps what they've had in previous years. Just give them a push in the right direction, because I think some schools just need to be asked, really.
Okay. Well, I think we can take those those courses of action. Anything else anybody else wants to raise under correspondence? Okay. And then just ask then members' agreement to deal with the correspondence, those items I haven't mentioned, just as per the cover sheet on pages 39 to 45. Okay. Right, move on then to the next item, which is the draft forward work programme, which is at pages 140 to 142. Remind members we previously agreed a meeting to be held in Stranmillis University College, and I suppose really ask members wish to schedule that meeting prior to the recess, or do you want to do it after the recess, or when? Any suggestions of anybody? Just remind members we have 2 external meetings that are scheduled between now and recess, one in Lurgan at Kira Special School, which is next week, and then the 10th of June we're down to Derrygonnelly. So from that point of view, members, do you have any suggestion in terms of timing of the, or do you want to aim that for September, or?
So, Chair, if the clerk arranges this for, say, like the last meeting in June, will members come along? It's only Stranmillis, quite easy to get to. You can get the Parliament buildings.
You can wear casual clothes, work games in on the last day, but if we aim for then the last week in June, if that's doable from the point of view of timing. Okay. Sorry.
Right, we have a problem before your time, obviously. I'm sure it'll change now. With attendance at events, and the further away we go, the less members manage to make it.
Well, strictly speaking, the fewer members on the list, but
yeah, okay. But the last one at Limma Valley was just downright embarrassing. I think your predecessor did attempt to establish how many people would be prepared to go to Derrygonnelly. Okay,
well, let's deal with there's the two issues. I mean, I suppose the most immediate one in terms of timing is we're due, and obviously we've accepted the invitation to the Kira Special School next week in Lurgan. I suppose first of all, could we have an indication for that as to attendance on that, certainly? Okay.
Is that Derrygonnelly?
No, Sierra.
Aye, that's a good.
Yep. Okay, so Sierra. Okay, so we should at least have clear-cut quorum. Obviously, appreciate there's a couple of members missing today. Derrygonnelly on the 10th of June. Again, we should have a quorum then. Okay. Well, we'll have to see what can be done to improve attendance on that sort of things. Obviously, with the option as well for some of you don't fancy going down that far of car sharing with some of us that are. I don't know if that will increase or reduce the numbers attending on that basis.
We'll need a naughty step in here. If you
Indeed, indeed.
Can I just say when we go to Sierra Special School, I have to be here for another meeting at 1. So
okay, well we'll try and appreciate without being in any way rude to people. We'll try and make sure that from that point of view we keep things on a sort of business-like level in terms of timing. Because I appreciate there's always the site restriction sometimes with effectively site visits. We're all trying to juggle various other activities that we need to do, and I think we'll be mindful of that. Sandra, but thanks for letting us.
Knowledge is better than.
No, absolutely, particularly the Education Committee.
Absolutely.
Right. We move on then to, again, we're still in private session, the next item, which is the area planning position paper, and there's revised. Welcome. Okay, folks, we're formally restarting the session. This is our inquiry into integrated education. It was our shared and integrated education. Remind those members in the public gallery just to switch off your mobile phones, as this is an open session, will be recorded. We don't want any of the wise words that are said around the table today to be lost to posterity. To refer members to the cover note, which is at page 144 of your pack, and to the relevant papers, including a table paper on the ePartners project and the table's departmental correspondence on the joint managed school. Now, I'd like to welcome then the officials joining us, Faustina Graham, who's Director of Collaborative Education and Practice, Andrew Bell, Head of Shared Education and the Community Relations team, and Suzanne Kingan, Head of the Irish Medium and Integrated team. And just remind officials that this will be a session will be recorded by Hansard and we'd invite you with obviously a wide range of questions. And the aim obviously today particularly will be to try and, from the committee's point of view, at least be helpful to the department by drawing our thoughts together, hopefully, on that, which we will have with you reasonably soon. But I would invite you first of all to make your opening statement.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I welcome the opportunity to brief the committee on the outcome of the public consultation on the Sharing Works policy for shared education and also on the draft bill. I hope also to provide further clarification and update members on progress since we last briefed the committee in January. As members are aware, the policy sets out a comprehensive framework for the future development of shared education, building on the research, consultation and recommendations of the Ministerial Advisory Group. The policy itself contains 14 overarching actions that will support the advancement of shared education. It sets out plans to define, encourage and facilitate shared education through legislation, and also support structures to fund, develop and embed sharing throughout the system. An 8-week consultation was undertaken on both the draft policy and the bill from the 5th of January to the 6th of March, and 67 organisations responded. For the most part, consultation responses were supportive and did not raise significant objections or major issues in relation to the draft policy or bill. Some of the comments we received reflected misperceptions or incorrect assumptions as to how shared education will be advanced. We find that these proved extremely useful in directing us to where amending wording would actually provide clarity and avoid potential ambiguity. The most common issue raised related to the relationship between integrated and shared education. Integrated education then provides for the education together at school of Protestant and Roman Catholic pupils, and that's as per the wording of Article 64 of the 1989 Education Reform Order. In the context of this inquiry, I would like to place on record the Department's recognition of the significant contribution of the integrated sector in educating children from different community backgrounds together over the last 30 years. The Department remains fully committed and alive to the proactive implementation of its statutory duty to encourage and facilitate integrated education under Article 64. Shared education then aims to improve educational outcomes, including reconciliation outcomes, through inter-school collaboration. Mutual understanding, citizenship and cultural understanding are key areas within our curriculum and provide explicit opportunities to address community relations, reconciliation, equality, diversity and human rights. Consequently, I think it's important to say that we see reconciliation outcomes as integral to and interdependent with educational outcomes and not as something separate, and that's irrespective of the educational context or setting. Therefore, it is not a question of either or with regards to integrated education and shared education. Going forward, both integrated and shared education have complementary roles in contributing to the development of a more tolerant, diverse, pluralist and shared society here. Nevertheless, amendments have been made to the policy to explicitly reference and to set in context the Department's statutory duty to encourage and facilitate integrated education, and also to reinforce the opportunity to learn from the integrated sector's experience in developing and deepening an inclusive ethos. More broadly then, refinements to the policy include changes to terminology to remove any misconception that shared education is only relevant to schools and pupils, and clarification provided that it is inclusive of youth and early years settings. Explicit reference to children from different religious backgrounds in the policy description. More explicit reference to the role of sectoral support bodies. Strengthening the section on the role of special schools and learning support centres. and further clarification of the role of wider communities in advancing shared education. Also, ensuring practitioners have the right skills has been a common thread in evidence presented to the committee, and we fully endorse this view. The DSC Shared Education Signature Project, for example, includes provision for teacher training. And within the spirit of sharing, we have invited stakeholders to collaborate to bring forward proposals for a capacity building strategy for teachers. Again, in response to feedback, reference has also been added to the section in the policy which sets the policy within the wider legislative context to reflect the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and other relevant human rights legislation. Turning then to the bill, and the Shared Education Bill provides a legislative definition, providing the Department and relevant arm's-length bodies with the power to encourage and facilitate shared education. As this is very much a developing area, and given its wide scope, this power will provide necessary flexibility as we seek to further develop and embed shared education. Again, the proposed legislative power is complementary to and in no way undermines or supersedes the Department's statutory duty to integrated education. The draft bill defines shared education as the education together of those of different religious belief or political opinion and those who are experiencing significant socio-economic deprivation and those who are not. Some respondents, including some schools, identified practical difficulties in referencing political opinion and the word significant with regards to socio-economic status in Clause 2 of the draft bill. On further reflection, the Department has removed both from the wording of the bill. And that leaves us then with a definition which is the education together of those of different religious belief and socio-economic background. There was some suggestion also that all Section 75 groups should be specified in the legislative definition. In reality, this would set very challenging demands on the mix of children and young people that would be required in order to meet the definition. For example, including gender would have implications for partnerships of single-sex schools, and it is neither practical nor desirable for organisations to identify the sexual orientation of children and young people. The legislative definition is underpinned by the policy description, which encourages educational settings to work to maximise the education together of those from all Section 75 groups as far as is practically possible. The Ministerial Advisory Group in its 2013 report said in relation to that description, in taking into account a wide range of evidence submitted, the Ministerial Advisory Group endorses the broadened definition of shared education provided in the Minister's terms of reference. This definition then is the one that is reflected in the policy. In terms of progress then, since we last briefed the committee, 32 partnerships comprising 72 schools had funding applications approved under the first call of the DSC Shared Education Signature Project. A further 10 partnerships consisting of 27 schools have been invited to refine and resubmit their applications, and a second call for applications closes this month. Schools will be advised of the outcome prior to the end of the current academic year to allow planning for implementation to commence. A project coordinator and a team of shared education development officers are now in place to support schools through the application process and also in embedding shared education. The Ministerial Advisory Group recommended a shared education premium within the common funding formula. As there are both advantages and disadvantages to this approach, the Minister has committed to use the experience from the DSC project to determine the best mechanism for funding and mainstreaming any additional costs. Building the capacity of organisations to develop collaborative working where there is no history of partnerships between those schools will be addressed through the work we have undertaken with the special EU programmes body. The design of the shared education thematic area within Piece 4 will recognise that organisations which have not yet engaged in sharing need a different type of support. In conclusion, then, the Minister has clearly articulated his vision for the future of shared education. A vision for vibrant, self-improving education communities, delivering educational benefits to learners, encouraging the efficient and effective use of resources, and promoting equality of opportunity, good relations, equality of identity, respect for diversity, and community cohesion. We believe that the shared education policy and bill provide a coherent framework to achieve this vision. And we welcome the opportunity to answer any of your questions.
Thank you for that opening comments. Obviously, the committee's been conducting an inquiry. I think we've had so far 25 evidence sessions. It's given us the opportunity for a number of school visits, and I think it's important to place on record at this stage that I think as a committee we've been impressed by the quality and standard of both the formal and informal contacts that are already there, both in terms of improvement of educational attainment and in terms of community relations. One area I suppose the committee has been concerned about, I know you mentioned about the either-or situation earlier, and we take that in a slightly different context, is the discontinuation of funding for CRED. And I suppose particularly given the Life and Times survey, and indeed would note obviously the very positive findings of the EDI review into CRED. We will be asking you quite a few questions, just in terms of the either-or. If it comes down to the issue of CRED and shared education, I suppose there would be a concern that CRED schemes are often a prerequisite, a sort of initial stepping stone for school communities prior to the meaningful shared education. And I suppose maybe first of all if you can comment just on the situation as regards CRED.
Okay, we came to the committee 2 weeks ago and talked about the situation with regard to CRED, and obviously the funding has stopped. What we hope to do now is, as part of the review process for the policy, which was underway anyway before the funding stopped, is to look very carefully at all of the recommendations from the Education and Training Inspectorate report and use that as a platform to move forward, because I think we are where we are in terms of the funding, but the whole thrust of the funding for CRED was directed towards capacity building for the system, and I think the outworkings from the ETI review demonstrate that significant capacity has been built, and it is now how we manage to take that forward without the additional funding that we had.
Well, does that mean that the door is closed on future funding for CRED, or is it a question of once you review from the DETI or the ETI sort of side of it that it could then be elements of that reinstated?
The Minister, in ending the earmarked funding, which, as Christina said, was specifically for a specific purpose, the Minister has indicated that the CRED policy will remain and the CRED work will be mainstreamed. So schools, boards, Youth Council will be expected to deliver CRED through their mainstream funding. Yeah. The earmarked funding was there because the previous review of community relations schemes had identified issues particularly around capacity building and sharing good experience, but that all happened through the earmark funding. So essentially CRED will remain, it will continue to be, or should continue to be delivered through existing funding. And indeed we have actually identified that for both the Education Authority and the Youth Council, that there is an expectation to address CRED within their existing budget.
I mean, I think that's something that the committee will want to keep a close eye on, because again, I suppose we've all seen situations in different departments where when something is mainstreamed, that can either be a good thing in terms of making it a key component of everything that's done, or alternatively it can be a code for it disappearing altogether. In that regard, mainstream can be a certain level of euphemism for death of a particular project. So we want to just see how that operates in practice. We do have a fairly wide range of questions. The first couple of questions will come from Chris.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. I guess I want to start off maybe by asking a few questions around integrated education. Time and time again we see surveys and newspaper reports of a very high demand for integrated education. Yet, when we look at school places and where that demand is eventually met, the figures are never tally. We're not seeing the growth of integrated education is what some of these surveys would suggest is out there. Why is that the case?
I think it's hard to know, in the sense that ultimately the demand for integrated education has got to come from communities, and I think it is about how those communities then respond to wanting to have integrated education in their schools. I think the important thing for us, I suppose, is that in the absence of the growth of the integrated sector, I think we can't afford to stand still on the whole issue of community cohesion and building a better future for children and young people. So we've seen that slowing down, and I think certainly that doesn't mean that nothing can be done with regard to the growth of the integrated sector, and I think that obviously is something that we can work with the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education on. Certainly we're working with them on their business planning process for the next year, as they now have become an NDPB, and I think the whole thrust of change in the education sector without that kind of certainty of how organisations would move forward has probably caused a bit of a hiatus there, but certainly we will be looking at that carefully with them.
You seem to suggest, if I'm picking up right, that it nearly needs to be like a voluntary move from the community to embrace integrated education, but the department has a legislative duty to encourage and facilitate it.
Yes.
Does the department not need to be doing more? Like, for example, if you'd been waiting for communities in America to voluntarily desegregate, we probably would have still been waiting by now. Does the department need to do more when it comes to integrated education?
I think the department obviously funds NICE to provide a support role to communities that wish to take forward integrated option. There's obviously a variety of paths by which communities can embrace the integrated option. One is through the establishment of a grant-maintained integrated school. The other is transformation of existing schools. So there's different avenues there that are open, and the department provides support to schools as well that have indicated a wish to transform and post-transformation. Members may be aware that obviously the Minister is considering the need for and the scope of a potential future review of integrated education.
You mentioned NICE there. NICE obviously aren't a statutory planning organisation on behalf of integrated, whereas CCMS perhaps can be described as that for Catholic schools and controlled, or education library boards as they were for controlled. So you could argue that no one's formally planning for the growth of integrated education. Again, your critics of the department will say you have a duty to encourage and facilitate the growth of integrated education. You're not doing that.
The NICE is represented obviously at all levels throughout the area planning process, from the area planning steering group, the local working groups, etc. And there's very much an onus on both the Education Authority and CCMS to work closely with NICE in the planning of the schools estate. Okay,
so is that situation failing then? Is NICE failing? Is the department failing? Because we're not seeing the growth. No matter what we do here and talk about what is happening, we're not seeing the growth of integrated as what public support would tend to be. So what's not working?
I think there is a role certainly for NICE as we move forward, because I think for the department to be prescriptive is not the way that we ensure that integrated education grows. I think every piece of evidence I've ever read telling people what's good for them and being prescriptive is not going to actually change things. We have to win hearts and minds on this, and I think there is something that all of us can do in terms of working together around how we access more creatively perhaps community support for the growth of integrated education. I think we have used methods which are not necessarily tried and tested, in the sense that, again, you can use a questionnaire, for example, as you've said, and people can suggest that isn't maybe as as strong or as robust as it could be. So I think we have to find ways, and certainly we will be working with NICE. We also have a meeting set up with the Integrated Education Fund as well to look at, are there more creative ways of accessing what community support is actually there. I think that the separate bit, as Suzanne has said, is the area planning process, and I think looking at the whole transformation process. And in the department, in terms of encouraging and facilitating, we hope to look again at the transformation policy, and if the Minister, in considering the scope of a review of integrated education, should look at that, then I think again that would allow us to look at a process which has been in place for some time, and which again probably would benefit from a second look at this point in time.
Just finally, Chair, again, go back to the duty. You know, it's arguable that the area planning process has encouraged or facilitated integrated education. Will this new shared education, to what extent is it going to facilitate and encourage integrated education?
Well, I think we've spoken at other appearances in the committee about that view that integrated education sits at the top end of a continuum of sharing, really, where you have a fully integrated model then within a school. But I think what we're looking at then with shared education is those opportunities, as I've said in the briefing, for inter-school collaboration. And that may in time lead to schools seeing that they have more in common than they have different with regard to actually working collaboratively and perhaps actually becoming one school in some instances, particularly around efficient and effective use of resources. But I think that has to be a decision which comes from those schools in particular and from the governors and communities with which they work. The shared education programme, and I've made reference to the whole concept of working with communities. One of the key aspects of the programme really is the role of the school in the community, and I think certainly in education terms generally it's always been a key part of what is expected of a school. But in looking at, for example, the bids which came in under the DSE programme, it has been probably the weakest part of the action plans that are there. So everything seems to suggest that we, in education, I think, are not as strong as we could have been at every level, I think, of the system in terms of community engagement. And I think we've tried in lots of ways. We've looked at ways of trying to encourage parents in particular to become part of the school process, and very often people do feel welcomed into the school, but I think we haven't maximised the potential of how our schools can truly engage with communities, and that may be of its time in the sense of, you know, what do we need for the 21st century in order to fully engage communities in their schools and vice versa. But certainly the action plans that we've seen to me indicate that there is something there that we can work on, in the same way as I've said to you that we hope to work with NICE as well, because if we say it is about community engagement, then we have to ensure that that community engagement is meaningful.
Is that a particular piece of work that's ongoing at the minute then, looking at the engagement and how? With
the shared education, it is a key part. Each of the partnerships have 4 areas to look at, all of which are linked to the key pillars of every school, a good school essentially, one of which is the school and its community. So therefore, if the partnerships are working together and the schools are working together, then there is the expectation that they will also work with the community. Each partnership is, in designing the action plan, is trying to move forward along the continuum, at least one. We've identified it in 4 stages, or the Education and Training Inspectorate has, and excuse me, they need to move along that continuum in order to demonstrate success in the programme. So I think there's a huge amount of learning we should be able to accrue across the shared education programme that will, I think, have application to all schools, never mind the schools which are involved in this particular programme. But I think that's where we can begin to really get serious about how we engage to its optimum, I suppose, with the community that every school is situated within.
Okay. Sorry, just finally, just one point on the duty again. Some witnesses have said it's time for the duty to go. Some have said it needs to be bolstered. Where do you think we need to be going as far as the duty is concerned?
Well, as far as we're concerned, the duty is there, and we are, as I said, committed to being proactive in its implementation. That's the duty that is there, and that is the duty that the department will continue to fulfil.
Trevor?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. I suppose I'm going to be on the same tack here as you might expect. You did say in your presentation, Christina, that the department remains fully committed to supporting the integrated sector. Well, apart from funding NICE, can you give us any example of something proactive that the department has done to fulfil their obligation to encourage integrated education?
Well, internally in the department, we have looked very carefully across the department at the Minister has asked that we do that. We do exactly what you say, that we look at ensuring that we are encouraging and facilitating both integrated and Irish medium education, because we obviously have a statutory duty there too. And over the last year, we've conducted workshops internally in the department for all of the senior officials in the department. And I think you can't underestimate the fact that we fund NICE. The department's statutory duty is to encourage and facilitate. NICE's duty then, or NICE's work, is to promote then the integrated sector as well. So we have a statutory duty to encourage and facilitate. Sorry.
It's also one of the issues that we look at in terms of developing policies as to where we can actually support it. So, for example, transport policy and temporary variation policy both will be, well, other schools would see it as being more generous towards the integrated sector, but it takes into account the statutory duty and policy development work.
And well, transport policy, I fancy Judge Tracy gave you a considerable shove when he made his ruling about Irish medium, which obviously reflects. Still, I mean, it's all very well to say that you've conducted internal exercises, presumably to make sure that everybody in the department understands what the obligation is. I still don't see what you've actually done externally to encourage. I mean, has the department ever done anything by way of information output to schools or to communities that would make people like me, who might be slightly sceptical, think that they're actually proactively trying to encourage integrated education?
The department, we've recently updated the website, the department's website, so that actually integrated education figures on the homepage. And
that's the first time?
It's always been on the website, but now it has a quick link to it on the front page for the first time. The other issues just maybe could mention are the department obviously has provided funding to support Transform Schools for the first 5 years after their transformation, and the statutory development proposal process, which really underpins area planning. And considering all development proposals, the department really infuses the consideration of the statutory duty when it's considering those proposals. And as Christina said earlier, the Minister is obviously considering a potential review of integrated education, and part of the review of any review of the transformation process will look at how we can make that, you know, a more publicly known and accessible process.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, the word encourage, if you look at the dictionary definition, and I'll not bore you with what it says, but we all understand what encourage means. It obviously involves proactivity. It's good that you're finally putting something on the web page and you're instructing all your staff internally that integrated education exists. But, you know, have you ever explained to schools the process of transformation as it currently exists? I know it's under review, but has the department ever made any attempt to, in terms of outreach, to explain to schools this is an option, this is an available option for you? Or do you just leave it to NICE? And while I'm at it, how much money does NICE actually get?
The department's produced a transformation guide, transformation pack for schools, which was provided to all grant-aided schools, which explains how to access and the operation of the transformation process. It's called a transformation guide for schools.
When was that done?
I'd need to find out the date for you. I can come back to you.
But in the 1970s or 2000? I mean, I don't remember it.
No, it's certainly post. I think the last time it was updated was probably 2009.
What amount of funding does NICE get?
Around 650,000.
Is that before the cut or after?
That's after the cut.
Yeah, well, I have 600,000 written down, so I'll not argue with you. That's what you might call a drop in
It
the
would have
ocean.
been around 700 before.
Yeah, that's cut. I can't argue about the need for cuts at the moment, but I suppose it depends on priority. Anyway, what do you say to the accusation that we've heard in here in the course of this review that the area planning arrangements require the other sectors to actually authorise growth in the integrated sector? Do you agree with that? Do you agree with the suggestion that the provision has never been increased for integrated education in an area plan as a consequence of parental demand?
Sorry, I lost the second bit of that.
Just gone off my screen too. The provision for integrated education as a consequence of parental demand never seems to be built into the consideration under area planning.
You want to?
Obviously, we're not from the area planning side of the department, and colleagues are maybe better able to answer your queries. But in terms of area planning, NICE has an integral role in all levels of the area planning process, and the department is keen to ensure that both the Education Authority and CCMS work closely with NICE in developing plans for the integrated sector going forward.
Do you think the current area planning rules, as they sit around the needs model and the various considerations, mitigate in favour or against integrated education, or would you say they were neutral?
I don't think any of us at the table would propose to be experts on the details of the needs model.
But there wasn't, I mean, I think it's fair to say that Justice Tracy didn't say there was a problem with the needs model. I think it is that the needs model has to be applied sensibly. It's not meant to be something which is hard and fast. It is indicative of what might happen in terms of how populations will grow or change. And I think, the important thing within area planning, and I'm saying this again, as Suzanne said, is not someone who works in that whole area, but I think the important thing in area planning is the range of information which the department looks at and provides to the Minister in order to inform his decision, and ultimately the decision will then be the Minister's based on all of the information which comes in, and there is a very clear process there which does allow people to opt in to the various consultation processes along the way. So I think that process is very comprehensive. Whatever anyone's view of it is obviously what they are free to talk to you about. But I think the department does have a very comprehensive process in place for making the decision. For the development proposal.
The needs model, according to Judge Tracy, and I haven't got this here, but he did criticise it. And he said that it currently involves projections of the need for the maintained and the controlled sectors, but not the integrated sector, in simple terms. I know you're going to say you're not experts in area planning, but I mean that's more or less what it says, which indicates to me something not far short of discrimination against the integrated sector.
I don't have it in front of me either, but that was not my interpretation of what Justice Tracy said about the needs model. So I can't not say that it would be different to what you've said. But like yourself, I can't say authoritatively. But that would not be my interpretation or my recollection of what the judge said.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Sean.
Right.
You looked a bit startled there.
Thank you.
Short speeches.
In terms of integrated schools versus jointly managed schools, there seems to be a few material differences, according to the department, between them. If that is the case, why do we need jointly managed schools?
The interest for jointly managed schools came from communities. Communities were interested in exploring the option of jointly managed schools, whereby the school would be organically linked to both the Catholic Church and the transferring churches through the composition of the school trustees and the boards of governors. number of communities were interested in exploring that. The department then worked with the transfers and trustees to develop guidance for those communities who may wish to consider this option.
I mean, it's maybe worth saying as well that there are more similarities than there are differences, but the differences make jointly managed schools more acceptable to some communities. I know that when the committee heard evidence from CCMS and Northern Ireland Commission on for Catholic education, they clearly set out their view regarding the legal protection of ownership of the trustees and the property guarantees that are issues which they very clearly value, and they also indicated the place that they on the fundamental values of a shared common good, reconciliation and peace, which they said were central to Christianity, are protected in law. And both the Catholic trustees and the transferors have said that they're willing to collaborate together on the basis of protection, that both of them value the Christian ethos. So crucially, for jointly managed schools, the transfers and the Catholic trustees are content with the legislation. And we talked last time about the differences between the setup of a jointly managed school from an integrated school, and crucially they see that as a key point in terms of moving the whole thing forward. They see that as a key issue, and from that point of view it is very much a bottom-up approach and an issue which I think may well make a significant difference in having a more integrated system, not necessarily of integrated status. I think some people have referred to it as the difference between a capital I and a small I.
When you say Christianity would be more protected in law, could you clarify the department's position for me in terms of, will jointly managed schools indeed a better legal protection for the Christian ethos than either the integrated or the controlled sector?
Because in the case of a jointly managed school, the trustees and the transfers will agree the make-up of the Board of Governors. There are certain places that they will agree between them, so they will have ensure that those places are on those schools. And since the Board of Governors sets the ethos for the school, then it follows that the expectation is that the ethos would be a Christian ethos.
I think the point to some extent has been made is there's the issue of what happens in practice in terms of having people from different sectors there to provide that sort of practical protection. But I suppose the issue is really the issue around better legal protection. I suppose maybe if you can drill down.
It is, because I mean I think in their evidence they actually talked about the fact that yes, that can happen in other schools, but the difference is that it doesn't necessarily have that legal protection. That's the key difference. In my reading of what they said to yourselves, that seems to be one of the key principles.
So it won't have better legal protection. The jointly managed won't have better legal protection for the Christian ethos than the control of the department.
They say that, well,
no, from the department point of view.
Sorry, I was just going to say it might be worth separating ethos from the legal position in terms of the provision of collective worship and the provision of religious education. The provision of collective worship and religious education for all schools is set out in the 1986 Education Reform Order, and it makes provision for daily collective worship at both controlled, grant maintained, integrated as amended in the 89 Order, so all categories of schools. So there's legal protection in statute for the provision of religious education and collective worship at all schools. The point that Andrew's making is that in a jointly managed school, we would expect a formal memorandum of agreement to be in place between the Catholic, as we've set out in our circular, a formal memorandum of agreement in place between the Catholic trustees and the transferors on the future ethos of the school, on the arrangements for religious education, etc. The other thing is that both those churches will be trustees of the school and therefore in the Board of Governors. So in the eyes of those stakeholders, they feel that gives an additional protection to the Christian ethos and the individual ethos of both the churches.
Yeah, but while there'll be a memorandum, there's really no further legal protection for Christian ethos. in a jointly
Ethos isn't something that is actually prescribed in law. School ethos isn't prescribed in law, but it's very important. There are legal differences in the constitution of the schools through the Board of Governors, which therefore can be perceived as an additional legal protection, if you follow me.
Yeah, okay.
I think Trevor wanted in just on that point.
It's just a quick addition to that, really. It's quite heartening to see that the trustees and the transferors have managed to agree on something like this. Does it need the agreement of CCMS for one of these schools to be set up?
I think we talked about it last time. We had said CCMS obviously had been fully cited on the draft guidance. The circular expects that the development proposal to close the existing maintained school will obviously, if it's an amalgamation of a controlled and maintained school, will obviously be brought forward by CCMS, and that CCMS, working in conjunction with the Education Authority, would bring forward the development proposal to establish the new jointly managed school.
And I think CCMS, in its presentation to the committee, made the distinction that it was not a group like NICE in that way in terms of promoting Catholic education, but that it is there to manage the schools estate which is already in place. And they did make that distinction, certainly in my reading of the evidence to the committee, that there was that distinction. So it is not a case of that decision would come from the church working with the transferors.
It might also be worth saying that in where we have met with communities who have expressed an interest in this, both well, it would have been the boards at that stage, and CCMS have been involved, and they have both been very willing to explore the issues with those communities.
Yeah, that's lovely. CCMS speak for push it down the pipe, frankly. The CCMS seems to me will have a blocking role in this if they want to exercise it, and they may be making the right noises just now for the future, but if you look at their current history, I mean, as far as I can remember, they've only ever acceded to one organisation with a controlled school, and that's Clinty Clay, and the Minister has now challenged that. He's challenged the result of a judicial review. So I really don't know where we go with this, but I'm just curious to know that does CCMS, separately from the Catholic trustees, have a legal right to block? Because in their evidence to us, Faustina, they actually said, didn't just say to maintain or to manage the sector, they said that their remit was to open, close and maintain Catholic schools.
Okay. Sean, do you want, I mean, this is...
I'll just keep going, yeah.
That's okay, keep on going, yeah.
In terms of, I think we're all aware of the mix in schools, and with many schools that are highly mixed or super mixed, as we call it. What has the department done to promote that natural integration in schools right across the north?
I think in relation to some of the schemes that we've had in the past, like community relations schemes, etc., that has been a natural consequence, and we would hope that again through shared education that will further drive that work forward.
Has the department done any studies on super mixed schools to see what really makes them tick in terms of the mixing?
We haven't. Well, I'm not aware of any particular studies. When I was responsible for managing agent for the International Fund for Ireland, the fund had asked us to do some work around schools and what made certain schools more acceptable to both communities and others. And I know there was a general feeling at that stage was that by creating and making schools neutral spaces is what would actually drive it forward. And during that work which we did on behalf of the fund, we met with a number of schools who have been very successful at attracting from both communities, and what became very obvious very quickly was that it wasn't about creating neutral spaces, it was about those schools being more acceptable to their communities, and very often it was parents who were making the choice, because when they looked at the academic outcomes of those schools, they felt that the schools in those areas were producing better academic outcomes, and that was part of the reason why they were sending. And in fact, it struck me when one of the schools that we visited actually explained that they had tried to make, it was a Catholic school, Catholic maintained school, and they had tried to make their leaver service more ecumenical, and they always had a leavers mass. But actually they told us that the Protestant pupils came and said, no, there's always been a long history of this school to have it as a mass, and it was actually the pupils who asked the school to do it in the same way as they'd always done it. So that was quite an interesting perspective. But that's as much in the way of a study that we've done.
No study. I just find that's disappointing, because you know, the work that goes on, I think it's important the department had to go deeper into that, because it goes a lot deeper than the leaving mass or the leaving service. Because I think what schools don't understand, particularly the super mixed schools that are out there that are doing really well, is that, you know, they can't avail of shared education funding now because of in their own institution, because they would have to link with another school.
Could I ask why they would have an objection to working collaboratively with another school? You know, what would be the problem with that? If they're doing well, then obviously it would be an encouragement to another school to gain and benefit from their experience. So I don't understand why, if you have an ethos of sharing in your school, you wouldn't want to actually work collaboratively with another school.
I don't think there's any problem with that, but why should they be penalised, where they're doing really super work in terms of sharing across the social divide, across the academic divide, and everything else, doing fantastically well? They see that they are being penalised because they have to link with another school rather than being rewarded. Whether it's a maintained school, a controlled school, or an integrated school, why can they not, that good practice, be rewarded? It goes back to my earlier point that I believe the department should have done an in-depth study in what makes super mixed schools really tick.
Well, don't forget that the shared education, the aim of shared education is about improving educational outcomes, including reconciliation outcomes. And part of that is based on research which shows that by schools collaborating with another school, that they can actually improve educational outcomes. And if they do it on a cross-community basis, reconciliation outcomes. So while those super mixed schools may have a good mix in terms of the communities, if they are a very good school, they have the opportunity to work with another school to raise that skill level. They can also learn from other schools, and indeed, in relation to the first set of applications that we've had under the Living Social Change Signature Project, last time we talked about the model and the framework which the Education Training Inspectorate have devised, which is a 4-level model, but there were no schools that were coming through, and we were targeting schools on the first phase that had already done a considerable amount of sharing. There were no schools who were at the top end of that level, which would suggest that all schools have an opportunity to benefit and raise educational outcomes by working collaboratively.
I guess there is a slightly separate point which Sean has been making in that, which is, you know, I don't think any of those schools will be objecting to sharing, and I think they'll probably be fairly proactive in these bits. But we do have a situation where at times there's been specific attempts to set up particular schools, and sometimes very successful and sometimes maybe less so. But we've seen a situation that certainly I know from my own area where we have seen a number of schools that have reached this position sort of effectively organically in that regard. And I think looking at the experience of those schools and trying to learn lessons from them, I think if there was a more proactive approach in terms of the exploration of information, may be useful.
Well, again, you need to go back to the fact that the Minister has recognised, and indeed through the Ministerial Advisory Group has recognised, that there are additional costs in terms of sharing. And we know from experience of 5 years of running 22 strategic projects across the province, that included 500 odd schools, that the main costs for sharing are around transport, teacher sub-cover for planning purposes, things like aligning timetables, etc., and then teacher sub-cover for actually when the teacher actually goes with the pupils to another school. So if you have, that's where the Delivering Social Change Signature funding is actually targeted. So if you are doing the work within your own school, you're not needing to do the work around the planning. You don't have the additional transport costs, and you don't have the subcover costs.
I think that's, we're maybe slightly talking, I think, at cross purposes there a little bit, which is, no one's saying that from that point of view, therefore, you're looking at some level of additional funding and that, but what we're saying is that there have been a number of schools that have essentially achieved certain things organically.
Yes.
And maybe they didn't set out to do that, but in terms of numbers, and it may be because of a particular set of circumstances within those areas. I'm just perhaps a little bit concerned that from a broader departmental point of view, there doesn't appear to be the curiosity to explore what is happening within those schools to see if there are useful lessons, and it might well be that. And I think that whenever exploration takes place, it's actually that these are maybe particular individual circumstances that are not transferable. Yes. But I think that is something which, without whatever is being done in terms of shared education, for instance, needs to be actually looked at to try and ensure that full information is pulled together.
I think that's a totally valid point, and I think it's important to say, I think everything is of its time as well. For some of those skills that you're talking about, to have shone a light on them at different points in time might not have actually been helpful. Some of the organic things that have happened over time, we're now in a place where those are things that can be celebrated. And I think over the next period of time, the whole concept of the work that is being done under shared education is to really look at precisely the things you're talking about. It is, what is it that makes the difference here? Because the truth of the matter is we don't know. I mean, I think that's the stage that we hope to get to by the end of the 4 years that we're embarking on now, because we're looking right across the whole spectrum. We're looking at those skills at the moment under the DSE programme which have a history of sharing. And I really would feel very strongly that it's hugely important for the skills that you've talked about, Mr. Rogers, to actually engage in this programme, because everything in education is about building communities of good practice. No skill should be in isolation, and I think where there is good practice and that can be shared, it should happen. But I think equally we are in a learning phase as to what is it that will actually allow us to get to a point, hopefully, at the end of this 4-year process, where we begin to see what we've described as a concept shared education as something which is integral to every school, and something which is part and parcel of what they do. I spoke earlier just about some of the explicit references in our curriculum that would lend themselves to shared education, and I think those are things that are there that we necessarily had the time both to provide professional development for our teachers, and we've indicated that as part of this programme, and also the opportunity to evaluate in the way that you've described. And I would be really hopeful that that is part of the journey that we're on at the moment, that we will find out the answers to the very questions that you're posing this morning as part of this process. That was the concept of engaging the Education and Training Inspectorate right at the beginning of this process in the design and development, and not just coming along as evaluators at the end, but to really try and accrue all of the learning that will influence the system by the end of the 4-year period. So your points are well made.
I'm not sure if you want to raise the issue on the drum roll.
Yeah, just one more on that, Andrew. In terms of we talked about timetabling and that type of thing, and that's a major problem. And I noticed that some of the earlier projects are schools that are very much adjacent to each other, whether it's Limavady or whether it's Ballycastle or Moy. But what consideration has been given to the rural white paper, where all our young people should have the same access to shared education and so on, particularly in rural areas, since Northern Ireland is so rural, and it really isn't feasible in some cases to link two schools because of the distance. It's okay if they're a few hundred yards, if they're in an urban environment, whatever. Skeptics of this would say that this is going to lead to urbanisation of our education system. The rural school is going to be a thing of the past, because it just, it brings, being able to link with another school, there's so many benefits, but it brings more funding in, and that's a crucial thing at the moment. So what's your comment on that?
Well, I suppose we can only point to the examples that we've already seen over the last 5 years of rural schools who, yes, it can be more challenging, there's no doubt about that, but particularly schools in the northeast, well, what was the northeastern border and now the northeastern region, and in Fermanagh that have very successfully collaborated together, and I know that the committee have already had statements and witness statements from those particular groups. So, you know, there is evidence that yes, it is more challenging, but that it will work. And there's also the whole aspect around which we are keen to explore around the whole use of technology and IT in terms of linking skills up. We had through the IFI programmes skills which use technology to actually link up as well as the face-to-face, which then also gives an additional element of a joined-up approach, although we would always advocate the face-to-face work rather than.
And I think in listening, certainly in the IFI projects, listening to principals of schools, particularly post-primary, where again, as you say, there's the added worry of do you lose class time by actually transport issues that accrue with that. In the consultation, we had feedback from young people about some of the concerns they would have around that as well. But I think what I found interesting listening to principals speaking is them being very honest about embarking on the IFI programmes in particular and feeling exactly what you said. You know what, we're getting extra funding here, but this is actually going to be so complex that we're going to struggle with it. And working through those problems, I think, and finding solutions to them. And I think the only thing we can do is try, and I think we see what has happened in some schools where those issues have been overcome, but they haven't been overcome just easily. I think it has been a case of, particularly over a 3-year period, the first year being quite difficult, the second year beginning to get some sense of, well, this is possible, and moving into a third year of that, actually thinking this is something worth fighting for. And I think when you see those outcomes from mixes of schools, then it is something which would also encourage us to keep pushing at the boundaries of that as well, while not, I think, at any point ever sacrificing the educational quality of a school. I think where a school knows what it can deliver on its own in terms of educational quality for its pupils, that shouldn't be compromised in any way. I think first and foremost the duty is to ensure that those young people get the best possible education. But I think we've seen how people have actually been able to describe the benefits that have accrued at the end of a process, while they themselves have been extremely fearful and extremely cautious at the beginning.
And it's probably worth saying that on the basis that there are good examples out there, people who have been through the process and have done it, and therefore we can point people now to those who have experience. And the Education Authority has development officers on the ground working with individual schools, and certainly if schools are having difficulties around that area, we would be expecting that the Education Authority will make that known to us, and we will then, you know, look at what are the issues and what are the barriers and how they can potentially be overcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan?
Yep, thank you, Chair. What are the present guidelines around minority community representation when it comes to integrated education? And more importantly, how many schools out there with the title integrated actually meet that criteria?
The criteria for a newly transformed school is that in the first year they will achieve 10%, working towards the 30% from the minority community, and the criteria for grant maintained integrated schools is that they work towards the 30%. Obviously, for certain schools and certain communities, those targets haven't been achieved. The schools continue to work to try to achieve those targets. I think there is some recognition that in some communities those targets may not be achieved, certainly in the short to medium term.
I'm interested in what you say, short to medium term. What's the definition of that?
Certainly within the next 5 years, in a number of schools it seems unlikely that they would meet the 30% target.
So if they don't meet the target in 15 years, what happens to them?
Well, the department work closely with the schools to try and ensure that they get the appropriate community balance.
So what happens to them?
In what sense?
If they never meet the target, what happens to them?
Well, there's no question of the department removing funding from those schools, or
Well, thanks for the honesty. So absolutely nothing happens. At least that's clarification on that.
Well, I think
how
to be
many,
fair,
how many
is-
schools? Sorry, I've got the answer. Many schools out there that are not called integrated actually meet this criteria.
There's much more to integrated status than simply the composition of the religious intake. There's an awful lot of work that the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education take forward around the ethos of those schools. There's also important, legal distinctions in terms of the composition of the Board of Governors and other aspects of the school provision. So there's important aspects of integrated provision that are much more than just a numbers game around minority population at the school.
Suzanne, do you actually know how many schools out there that are not in the integrated sector actually meet this criteria?
In terms of 30%, we could certainly find that out for you.
Not only the pupil religious breakdown, but there are plenty of schools out there who actually meet this criteria when it comes to make-up of the Board of Governors as well. Have we any idea what that is?
We do have that information in the department, but we couldn't just say off the top of our head here today.
But you would agree that there are a number of schools out there who meet the criteria but don't call themselves integrated.
Yes, I'd say there were a number, but that is, as Suzanne said, in terms of religious balance as opposed to ethos necessarily.
Yeah. Well, there's also a growing issue, and it is growing, issue out there of pupils and, I suppose, individuals who also don't want to tag themselves as either one or other community. And those figures generally across the board are growing. Is there going to be any change in this artificial criteria to allow for that?
I think, as we said earlier, the Minister at the present time is considering both the need for and the scope of a future review of integrated education.
Is it going to be reviewed then?
As I said, the Minister is considering both the need for and the scope, and whether that will encompass the areas that you've alluded to.
Trevor, do you want to not?
Only if Jonathan's finished.
Oh, yes, thank you, Chair.
Would you agree with me that, I hear what you say about the qualification for an integrated school applies at the start, in the early years of that school, whether it's transformation or a new school, and that there's really no reason. I think Jonathan's perhaps suggesting they should lose their integrated status if they can't comply. The fact is, would you agree with me on this, that the integrated schools are far more likely to take ethnic minorities, for instance. I was in one recently which has just taken in 4 or 6 Somalian children. I would venture to suggest wouldn't have been taken by any other school in the area, because it was a secondary school and they had no primary education whatsoever, nor did they have any English. So
I could cite examples of
there's far more
schools.
to it than just the Protestant Catholic balance. And again, Jonathan cites quite rightly examples of very good schools which don't have integrated labels, but which are effectively integrated. The one we always come back to, frankly, Chairman, is Methodist College, which wouldn't strictly qualify at the moment if it did apply for integrated status, because it only has 25% minority, but it has 55% non-Protestant. So this is it's a silly argument, it's exactly what you say, Suzanne. It's all around ethos and approach and balance, and what. I'm going to make a speech, and I don't mean to. But really,
I think, to be fair, Trevor, there's an awful lot of questions to get through, so
yes,
we could avoid speeches. It would be.
Yeah, but you'd agree with
helpful.
me about the approach.
Although I think it would be unfair to say that we would have very many schools that would be not willing to take in children who haven't had a previous education. I think that would be unfair, and I would want to correct that. I don't think it's only the integrated sector which will accept pupils who have a disadvantaged background in any way, in fairness. So that would be my experience.
Under open enrolment policy, obviously, schools will accept the pupils that apply if there are surplus places and capacity at the school. I think maybe just a point to make is that it is the position that the majority of integrated schools have achieved the 30% target.
Fair enough.
Trevor, just while you're on the, while you have the floor there, do you want to deal with this, the issue, this question on special schools and integration?
Yeah. Why is the department so hard set against giving special schools an integrated status?
I don't think the department has a view that special schools should not have integrated status. I think that it is the way special schools are constituted, that they see themselves as naturally, as we talked earlier, as organically integrated, and therefore there isn't the need for something which is called integrated status, I think, for those special schools.
So if one of them applies for integrated status from here on, the department would be minded to allow it if they satisfied the criteria for an integrated school?
Well, we'll come back to you with the detail, but I think my understanding is that at the minute the legislation prohibits a special school from becoming an integrated school, but I would like to come back to confirm that to you.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. You can come back, Susanna, but I do wonder if that's correct. Why on earth the legislation would prohibit such a transformation? I mean, like, that's the rule. That's the rule. The logic of it would interest me. You know, why?
We'll come back to you on the position.
Okay.
Can I ask you just then a couple of questions just around the definitional side of it? I mean, we talked earlier on about, and you mentioned and give, I suppose, a good reason why, from a practical point of view, widening when we're talking about shared into all the Section 75 groups isn't particularly practical. But I suppose one concern, people's, I think, general perception when they talk about shared education is people think of across the religious divide. And obviously that's clearly catered for, but you've also then, within the definition, obviously talked about the socio-economic deprivation. Now, I suppose to clarify in that regard, does that mean then, from the point of view of qualification of shared education, you could get two schools within exactly the same sector, one coming from, say, a fairly affluent area where the children come from sort of a very sort of affluent socio-economic background, and maybe another coming from a more deprived background in that regard, but the religious mix within those schools would say be virtually identical, would be essentially single identity in terms of that. But I mean, would that count then as definition of shared education if there's collaboration between those two schools?
Where both schools have the same community background?
Yeah, if you take for example, say in the controlled sector, and say you had for example, if we were talking about, say, at primary school level, and you had a controlled primary school, 95% plus from the broad sort of Protestant Unionist community, but it was very affluent, mixing them with a controlled primary school which is 95% plus Protestant Unionist community from a much more deprived. But will that count under this as then shared education on that basis? And to a certain extent, is that getting away from the notion, particularly, I think, that I would have thought the driver behind this was particularly to, largely speaking, cross the community divide?
I think there's just a couple of points to make in terms of the legislative definition. It's very much religious background and socio-economic. It's not or.
So it's an and. Effectively both boxes.
But having said that, obviously there may be circumstances where schools of the same management type have different religious backgrounds, given the eccentricities of the system. So in terms of individual programmes and applications to individual programmes, the department will look carefully at everything on a case-by-case basis. But in terms of the legislative definition, it is religious education and socio-economic, not or.
And is there, whenever say is there a pecking order within that? I mean, for example, in terms of shared education, if you got say a maintained school from socially deprived background wanting to have a level of shared education, perhaps it looks across a motorway or whatever and say, well, actually we want to have a level of link in with a controlled school, which again is also from a socially deprived background. Is the lack of social mobility within that, or social status within that, is that going to be then a barrier to being funded on the shared education side?
In terms of the Delivering Social Change project, we've looked at all the applications very much on a case-by-case basis, and I think it's safe to say that the applications are all able to demonstrate a reasonable degree of social mixing, the applications that we've received to date, so that issue hasn't arisen. I think the main thing is we don't want to be prescriptive. We don't want to say this is only about this type of school and this type of school, because our system does have so many eccentricities. There's controlled schools with majority Catholic populations and retained schools. In terms of the Delivering Social Change, we've indicated that in the majority of cases we would expect it to be schools of different management types cooperating.
Okay. Obviously, one of the issues that has been raised by an evidence from the Speedwell Trust is the issue of whole school sharing. And I suppose, what assurances can we get that whenever we're looking at it, we don't get simply tokenism in sharing? That's a question of, here are sort of half a dozen boxes that are ticked, which is showing some level of activity. It's almost like build up the brownie points and get the badge type of thing, as opposed to the notion that the shared education activities should be based on a whole school organisational involvement.
In terms of the Delivering Social Change signature project, the ETI have developed a shared education continuum. So at the beginning of the process, schools of partnerships evaluate where they are in that process, and the whole thrust of the project is that in 4 key areas that they will develop their relationships. We would expect to see an increase in both the quantum of sharing, that is the number of year groups that are participating in the shared education project, and also in the range of curricular areas that the sharing is. So that's very much built in to the planning of the project.
As part of that, then, it's really where the end game is really in each of those, in terms of project, because it may be that you're starting off with maybe a limited level of direct involvement, but so long as actually there's a clear,
there's a very clearly articulated
pathway, if you like, to a sharing. Okay.
So the schools have to provide an action plan as well as part of their application as to how they're going to move, and that action plan is looked at by the project board, who approve the applications as to whether they believe that that is sufficient to get the school from where it says it currently is to where it aims to be.
And I appreciate this is, I suppose, the final question I want to ask just in connection with this is, obviously in a wide range of education activities, and I appreciate this won't relate to the post-primary sector, but particularly whenever people are looking at the significance of early years, and obviously particularly if we're looking at both from a community relations point of view and also from an academic achievement point of view in terms of sharing. I mean, to what extent are you going to reflect the need for sharing from an early years point of view in the bill in terms of the obligations?
Well, early years, I mean, it's at the moment, early years is certainly covered in both the policy and indeed within the bill. But as regards actual programmes, the Delivering Social Change programme targets specifically schools, but we've been working with a special EU programmes body around the shared education thematic area for Piece 4, and Piece 4 will extend to schools that are currently that have not currently shared to early years and to the youth sector. And indeed, we have asked the Education Training Inspector, in fact, they've just actually completed it within the last couple of days. I've still to look in detail at it. Is a continuum model specifically for the early years sector, which ties in, and we've also asked them to do something similar for the youth sector, so that we have continuum models that are appropriate to those individual sectors.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand over now to Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. You had a consultation process there around the forthcoming legislation, but it said there on page, or one of the pages there, 3.1, the number of attendees at the public meetings was small. Many meetings were there, many people attended. What does small mean?
There were 3. We held 3 consultation events: one in Armagh, one in Belfast, and one in Derry/Londonderry. And the numbers were probably less than 10 at each of those events. We catered for as many as wanted to come, but those were the numbers who actually.
You say fewer than 10, that could be 2 or 9. would be interested to know just how small they were, because if there is this, as we're told, the evidence is there for a huge demand for more integration, more sharing. It is surprising that across the whole of Northern Ireland you couldn't even get 30 people to turn up.
Well, as you know, the process is that with public events, we advertise the public events fairly widely, and it is up to individuals as well.
I appreciate that. No, it's just,
yeah.
What does it say that so few people did turn up?
Well, it's whether they had I mean, you are asking people to come, and the events were held in the evening. We did it in the evening to facilitate as many people as possibly wish to attend, and it is really, you know, I suppose asking them to come out in the evening, and I suppose
if you're passionate about something, you'll turn up.
Absolutely, and those people who did turn up were very passionate.
Just there weren't many of them.
It's just there weren't many of them. Others did use the questionnaire process as well.
Would it be possible to get the exact figures for each of the three?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was reading John Dowd's introduction, steered forward to the policy, and there's a line that I just don't understand. It talks there about my vision for the future of shared education, one of vibrant, self-improving education communities, delivering educational benefits to learners, encouraging efficient and effective use of resources, that's fine, promoting equality of opportunity, good relations. Equality of identity, what does that mean?
Well, that's in relation to people from different communities coming together, people who identify with a different community or a different background coming together, so it's equality across those.
Is it well expressed, though, if it's not clear? Equality of identity, is that religious identity, cultural identity, what sort of identity?
I think we're trying to be as inclusive as possible, and it is open to those of different identity coming together, so it would fulfil
Is there a difference between inclusive and vague? Is there a difference between inclusive and vague?
There's also incoherent.
Well, I suppose that's. I mean, nobody. The only thing I can say is that nobody raised it as an issue during the public consultation. You're the first.
And I think there are certain things in life that people approach with a sort of glowing generosity that maybe they don't like to say these things. I can understand respect for diversity and community cohesion, but I think that the term equality of identity is actually meaningless. It needs to be much more specific and spelt out. And I can understand there's an attempt there to get something that reads well with a lot of little phrases of about 3 or 4 words. But I would stress, I think that identity is multi-layered, it's many different things. It's a core issue in Northern Ireland. It's important that if it's being mentioned in there, it needs to be mentioned, I think, properly. Just if I could ask also, if that could be relayed back. Just the other bit there, and Jonathan Craig touched on it. A school that is struggling to get up to an integrated school that is recognised as an integrated school and is trying to reach the criteria. What about the school then, and I think I know the answer if we're asking, that has reached the criteria at some point, then slides way back because for some reason or other, people from one community or another community walk away? I assume then that still also retains its integrated status.
Yes, but in terms of all the integrated schools, obviously the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education works closely with those schools to help them in terms of promoting the integrated ethos, and as part of their school development plan in an integrated school, the department would obviously expect there to be significant emphasis on the integrated ethos and promoting the integrated ethos within the school.
Would you have like a graph for each school that shows how they're doing in terms of reaching the criteria?
Yeah, we would not a graph, but we would certainly monitor the figures.
You would know whether a particular school is.
I would certainly have the figures. I might not know just off the top of my head, but yes.
But even if one community almost entirely walked away from the school, they would still retain their status. The money wouldn't be withdrawn.
It's important to distinguish between funding for a grant-aided school. There's funding for a grant-aided school, and then there's integrated status. Integrated status is something that is bestowed through a development proposal process. You know, it's statutory, it's in law. Once that's assumed through the development proposal process, it can only be taken away again via the development proposal process, which would have to come from the managing authority of the school to determine whether they, you know, wish to change their status to a different, you know, a management type of school.
Like Jonathan, want to come in on that one?
Just a supplementary to Nelson here. That's a fascinating thing you've said, Suzanne, because we all know how it's done. You know, you call the meeting of the parents, and 51% of them have to agree to integrated status. And some of the decisions made to go integrated have been extremely close. I'm aware of one school where really it was by 3 parents that decision was made. And that's out of a school of several hundred pupils and even more parents for that matter. Are you aware of that process ever being kicked off for a school that actually has never met the other criteria set out with integrated, the definition of what is integrated?
Well, the ballot for parents is part of the statutory transformation process. So that ballot, it almost begins a process. The ballot of parents has to get the positive, the 51%, as you've talked about, before a statutory development proposal can be published for a transformation to integrated status. As part of the statutory transformation process, there both be a pre-consultation and a full public consultation on the proposal. The Minister then, at the end of the 2-month statutory consultation period, will make his decision based on all the pertinent facts. The school then becomes a controlled integrated or a grant-maintained integrated school in law, and that's the process. The parental ballot allows the school to go forward with publishing the proposal. It's not the end of the process. In looking at a development proposal for transformation, one of the factors that the Minister will look at is the community balance in the school and the community balance in the surrounding area and the likelihood that the school may in future achieve the community balance.
As my colleague quite rightly pointed out, Suzanne, if A, the balance is never achieved, but more importantly, if local community support for the school actually lessens because of the integrated status, what actually mechanism is there, or what triggers the mechanism to revisit the integrated status? Because I don't believe there's anything.
It's a matter for the individual managing authority to consider the status of the school. As I said, it can only be reversed through another development proposal.
And if they did reverse, what would be the implications for the school financially?
There would be no significant implications for the school financially in terms of their LMS budget. As I said earlier, some transformed schools get a small, but it is a very small amount of funding from the department. The LMS budget is per pupil and would be unaffected.
And finally, just seems to me that the process, say there, is somewhat fraudulent in that the status doesn't get removed, even though there's criteria there. The criteria are meaningless in a sense.
Well, in looking at the proposal, the Minister will very carefully take into account
I mean, 5 years on, they become meaningless, or 10 years or 15 years, if the school has either never achieved the criteria or has achieved it and then slidden away back and is fallen out. So they become.
But I think we have to be careful here. We're reverting back to the concept of integrated education, meaning a balance of just religion, as opposed to, as Suzanne has articulated earlier, the whole concept of ethos. And I think in relation to every school will aspire to a particular ethos, whatever that is, dependent on what the governors actually set as the ethos of the school. The truth of the matter is we have integrated schools, we have controlled schools, we have maintained schools who do not actually fulfil the ethos they set out to aspire to. And in any of those situations, I think what becomes important is what is the school doing in the round in order to meet the best needs of its pupils. In terms of the 5-year process, as you said, obviously inspection will come along to all schools at some point in time, and we'll look very carefully at ethos. And unfortunately, we do have schools where we have found ethos to be unsatisfactory, horrifying. as that may seem. But I think for any school, if the ethos is not actually being fulfilled, that's irrespective, I think, of the numbers in terms of religious balance. All of the other elements around moral, spiritual, ethical education of children and young people are what come into play in ethos, and I think that's what has to be looked at. We've had lengthy discussions around that whole concept, and I think we have to look at it in the round, and particularly with regard to the integrated sector, because a school aspires to achieving that does not mean it always will. And in those situations, I think that school, whatever the issue, has got to be supported in order to actually allow it to realise that ethos back again, and that's the important thing for the children and young people.
Robin?
Thank you, Chair. Thank the members for coming this morning. I just ask you a few short questions, Chair, around the shared education programmes themselves. And you'd be aware of Sir Robert Salisbury's comments around shared education programmes and his thoughts that educational improvement should be the first step, but indeed that should be very quickly followed by improvements in reconciliation between communities, and that he would measure the success of shared education in those two ways. How does the department suggest that shared education should be measured, and is that likely to be tied in with any funding mechanism that would be offered?
I think the important thing in looking at shared education was for us really in the department trying to learn and benefit from what has happened in the past, and really looking at analysing what worked and didn't work in previous programmes. And the key concept, I think, in shared education is ensuring that it is totally focused on the Northern Ireland curriculum. And certainly, as you say, I saw Sir Bob's comments, and certainly to me they were very much in keeping with what I've said this morning. He was very clear that educational improvement is always first and foremost really important in a school. That's what it's there for, and obviously that is the aim of the department. But he also saw, as I have said this morning, no tension between the concept of both educational standards, as I would call it, and reconciliation outcomes. At times there has been a suggestion that the two things are separate. Integral to our curriculum are the thinking skills and personal capabilities, the attitudes and dispositions, and the subject areas I talked to you about this morning: citizenship, learning for life and work, and PDMU in the primary curriculum. So I think you had the comment you made earlier about lip service, and I think, you know, we've seen in the past where programmes have been interesting but they have been quite superficial. I think there is something for all schools in ensuring that schools can see, what's the value of this to me? We're busy, we're doing a lot of things, we're trying to get through all of the programmes we have, so how is this going to be valuable to me as a principal in the school and to the pupils in our school? And I think in ensuring that all of these programmes are very definitely curriculum based, it helps, I think, people to see that this is about both improving educational standards and reconciliation, and that both of those things are actually educational outcomes. We are trying to educate our young people to achieve highly, obviously, but also to be contributors to society in the future, and to be contributors to the economy. So the concept, I think, of measuring reconciliation outcomes is one that we've all struggled with. We've worked, and certainly the Education and Training Inspectorate in designing the work that it has done for evaluation is working very closely with Queen's also in looking at how do we actually get at the heart of measuring this as opposed to hoping that it's all going to work out. And I think probably there's no one else who has done any more detailed work than we've done here. So I think, you know, we are at the cutting edge of looking at how do we actually measure progression when it comes to that whole concept of reconciliation, and obviously respecting difference, tolerance, all of those things. Articulating how progression is achieved. We started that process in the evaluation of the IFI projects that Andrew has talked about, and we, I think, made good progress in doing that, but we're not there yet. I think that is something that hopefully we will gain and learn from interacting with all of the schools and ultimately the youth and early years organisations over the next period of time.
you've agreed this, the educational end is pretty well fairly easily measured. Success in that field. Reconciliation is a bit more difficult to measure. So in terms of funding, would funding be tied into, how would it be tied into a measure that is fairly nebulous at times?
I think, again, both Andrew and Suzanne have referred to the application process that has been put in place for the DSC programme, and really that is about schools demonstrating how they are going to work together and setting targets for themselves over a period of time. The continuum that ETA has developed is looking at the various stages of both improving educational standards and improving reconciliation outcomes. And that, at the minute, is a guide that allows schools to actually look at, well, here's where we think we are at the moment. That's not going to be, that will be tested by ETA in their baseline visits, obviously, to the schools, where they will look at, is this an accurate self-reflection of where you're at, and where is the evidence to demonstrate that? And over the course of the 4 years, each school then will demonstrate how it has progressed. What ETA will do then along the way is to refine that continuum in order to make those performance indicators, I think, sharper and clearer for everyone, and something that all schools can use over that course of time. We already do have indicators under the CRED policy for looking at community involvement, and I think beginning to combine all of those things and look at what is the best of those should give us a more rounded product.
And it's probably worth saying as well that overlaying that level, as Christina's talked about, at the project level, the business case has actually identified 3 measures, which are measures that Queen's have done a lot of work around this whole measurement around reconciliation, and those are cross-group friendship, positive action tendencies and intergroup anxiety. So we have very clear measures for the Delivering Social Change Signature project that we will expect to be moving. We've set out targets for those. Part of the difficulty is that we need to make sure that this work doesn't become a bureaucratic overhead for schools, and that also it is understandable to teachers. So we have asked the Inspectorate over the period of the 4 years to consider other measures that we can actually use, and as Christine said, we're at the forefront of this work to actually make that an easier measurement, rather than people trying to understand what cross-group friendships means, what positive action tendencies mean, what intergroup anxiety means.
I think that's quite important, because both from the point of view of the burden that would place on schools, but we've also seen, I'm sure all of us, whether it's in the education sector or different sectors out there, that if you've got projects which are effectively getting funded, quite often the money can go to the organisation which can produce the best paper copy and the best form fillers, rather than necessarily what the greatest need is in that regard. So I think adopting criteria which, and indeed conditions which are sort of clear and understandable to people, I think will be of significance. It's not just the person who's actually can fit in the most jargon into a particular application for it.
And don't forget that we have put, well, through the Education Authority, have put development officers into place to work with schools, and part of their role is working with schools through the application process. So all schools, for example, in both the first tranche and the second tranche, have attended workshops around the whole application process. Development officers will work with individual schools so that we try and overcome that problem, because, as you say, some schools are better than others at filling out forms, and we don't want anybody penalised.
It's the same with any sort of funding.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can I just building on the point that Peter has raised there, evidence to the committee already indicated there was a strong feeling about the need for support to build shared education, in terms of not just professional support to the direct teachers involved in it, but wider support to the Board of Governors, the parents of. Am I right in thinking that the department has accepted that will be the case, that provision of training and support will be provided, and if so, what form will that take?
Well, that's the work which Christina referred to in her opening statement that we've done around a capacity building strategy, and that capacity building strategy will cover all of those areas: teachers, skills, type of support, how they deal with parents. All of those issues will be covered through that, and we're working with and have invited, as Christine said in their opening statement, those who are working in this area to bring forward a proposal as to how that is best achieved. There are already a number of programmes out there. But I think the last thing that we want to see is that everybody is doing this in a very much a piecemeal fashion, that we want to have this as a very much a strategic approach. That was what we tried to achieve through the IFI programmes, and that was what resulted in programmes such as the credit programme from Strand Mills and St Mary's actually coming into fruition. And that programme was very well accepted by teachers, and another committee have heard that referenced in a number of your previous witness statements. So it is very much that strategic approach that we are seeking.
Can I take up a point that Nelson was making earlier around the cultural certainty of participating schools in these programmes? It's a phrase that's often used about capacity building. I'm never sure what capacity building actually means, either in this context or across in context. How would that capacity building actually address the cultural certainty or the cultural identity of pupils as well?
Well, the capacity building that Andrew's referred to, and apologies if that sounds like educational jargon, that capacity building is when we're talking about teachers and professional learning for teachers. So it really is about providing training that allows them, first and foremost, to address their own bias and to address the issues that they perceive to be difficult with regard to interacting with children and young people then in the same forum. A skillful teacher will be able to handle, for example, we've talked about Section 75 this morning, a skillful teacher will be able to handle the cross-community issues and any other issues around identity that a young person might bring, because it's seldom only one issue that a child or young person will have, but will be able to deal with those issues in a safe forum. First and foremost, I think, as those young people deal with all of the challenges that they have to deal with. So first and foremost, I think the capacity building focuses on us as adults. I think, very often what we see is that it is we, the adults, who bring more problems and are less open to all of the things that we're considering here with regard to the future than our children and young people are. But equally, if those children and young people are not actually taught in a condition and a situation where that openness around whoever they want themselves to be and whoever they feel themselves to be, then you could actually cause more damage than progress in that particular situation. So I think it really is about exploring for the teachers very much the various identities they feel they bring, and ultimately, from our perspective, certainly in the department, the approaches that teachers will use to working with children and young people, and the experiences they have in training, mirroring what we expect to see in the Northern Ireland curriculum. So all of those things that we expect to see in the curriculum, we should see in teacher education as well. And I think all of the issues that we've talked about this morning are there in our curriculum. So if we're talking about respecting difference, we're talking about tolerance, empathy, being able to articulate very clearly what your concerns are. I'm sure all of you will be aware we'll have schools or we'll have children where I think Sir Bob actually talked about, in fact, following a young woman through school where she hadn't contributed at all in the entire day. And, that's quite shocking, but it does happen. And I think, to ensure that our young people can actually be articulate in expressing their views, whatever those views are, without necessarily causing offence, but being confident still in expressing those views. Our teachers need to be able to do that too. Sometimes, particularly in a teaching situation, people will avoid things which may in any way suggest conflict, rather than addressing them because they feel worried that they might do more damage than good. So we have to equip our teachers, I think, with the skills to feel confident and comfortable about doing precisely that.
The definition of capacity building, as my previous post to the department was in training, capacity building is generally that what are the skills that you require to deliver something. In this case, what are the skills you require to deliver shared education. Then you do a needs analysis, what are the skills that are currently out there, and identify where the gaps are. And the capacity building strategy is simply how do you address those gaps? What is the strategy for addressing those gaps to get from where you are now to where you want to be? So hopefully that's maybe made it slightly clearer.
Yeah, just in terms, Christina, in terms of the role of the DEL Minister then in the primary teaching of the skills for the new intake of students to Stranmillis or St Mary's, what changes are there to their teaching programme to include shared education and the skills, the knowledge gaps, and as Andrew has outlined?
I mean, I think it's important to say that particularly across the IFI programmes, there were a number of courses which were introduced for teachers through our teacher training colleges.
Are you telling me that there are changes now in place in their curriculum?
In terms of an initial teacher education?
Yes.
Well, as Andrew said, what we have asked the educational stakeholders to do is to bring forward to us their ideas, working collaboratively. I think the important point for us in working with the teacher educators, and I will be coming to talk to you about teacher education in a few weeks, but one of the important things there, I think, is for all of our teacher educators to work collaboratively. It is not a case of everyone doing something different or separate, but we've asked for that work to be done so that it will be an agreed strategy, and I would like to think that that will impact very definitely on initial teacher education, but as you recognise, that's not actually our responsibility as such.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you want a brief follow-up there?
Yeah, just I think I accept the fact that it's not your responsibility, but the two things are utterly and totally inseparable. And I think there are two factors. There's a psychological factor and a practical factor or aspect of this. Psychological one is that quite often people have come from maybe a socio-economic need deprived background, done well, become teachers, moved on, and how do they relate to the community that they came from initially? Do they turn their back on it, or do they retain some affinity? And there's a practical one. In many of those socio-economically disadvantaged areas, I don't know anybody who plays the recorder, but I know an awful lot of people who play the B-flat flute. So what instrument is taught in the schools? What affinity does it have? What interest does it hold for the children? Cultural issues are right at the heart of this. And that's why the issue about identity of culture that was talked about earlier on, all of this needs teased out and honestly answered, because I think there's been a shying away from this for years. Within certain sectors, there's a cultural confidence and an assuredness there. It's only starting to come into particularly the controlled sector. You're getting some schools now that are doing really, really good work. We need to push that and promote that, and that's where the teacher training and
sorry, in order to address that point, we have actually picked up within the policy. It's probably worth mentioning because it's additional to what you would have previously seen following the public consultation, and we have a commitment in the department will liaise with higher education institutions and other relevant education providers on aligning their approaches to professional learning for practitioners in shared education. So we have recognised this is a new paragraph that's gone into the policy as a result of the public consultation under developing the workforce, so it is there now, very specifically.
Over now to Sandra, who's been very patient.
Thank you. And thank you very much for coming this morning and for bearing with us all our questions. Picking up on a few points from earlier on, we were talking about, or you were talking about skills action in the community. And the role in the community, and saying that was of high importance. I was just really wondering on the back of that, how is that measured? Is that measured in terms of how the school building is used and people coming in to use the building, or is that measured in terms of students out and participating in various activities within the community? Or is there a measurement of that? Do you have certain criteria set, or is it just on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's made very clear, particularly in relation to shared education within the framework which ETI have developed, the continuum framework that's been referenced a number of times, and under community connections section of that, it actually outlines if you're at an early stage in terms of sharing, then we would expect, for example, very much engagement with parents within the community, the wider community. As you move through, it builds, and each stage it gives indicators as to what what you should be doing at that stage. So the basic level is defining, it's termed defining, so that would be skills at a very early stage, and then move to developing. So on community connections, that will build to doing more work within the community. So the time you reach the top level, embedding, then what we're expecting is the skills have very much good connections with the community. The parents are well aware of what the shared education programs are doing. The skills are using community resources where they're possible. They can bring in people from the community who have experience of different areas that they want to cover. For example, within history, if they're teaching history, there may be people who have recent experience of that they can bring in. So all of those levels, and that also the school is very much aware of what is actually happening within the community. Because one of the things that we want schools to do is the curriculum sets out the minimum standards, but the schools have to take those standards and apply them as best for that group of children and young people. So if they understand what those children and young people are facing within their own local community, then they can better address that. So it's all of those levels. Okay. So maybe that answers.
That's interesting to hear that detail. Okay, thank you. Just another thought that occurred to me as we were going through discussions. In relation to shared education, has the department looked at other departmental policies that might actually work against the ideal of promoting shared education, such as the entitlement framework? Because I know in my own area in Muckerfelt, there's that shared education partnership, and that promotes the schools all working together. But because of the entitlement framework, people back off and need to deliver so many subjects on their own.
I think our experience from the application process has been that schools that maybe were initially paired with each other through the area learning communities to help them deliver the entitlement framework requirements, because you probably couldn't deliver it all within their own school. Some of these partnerships now have come through very strongly in the applications to shared education, and I think that experience of collaboration and cooperation with another school, and the practical difficulties that can sometimes entail in terms of timetabling, etc., is actually a very good basis from which to go forward with shared education. I don't think we would see any particular tension there at all. Okay.
And as we've developed the policy, we have looked to other policies in the department, because obviously it's a suite of policies, so this policy needs to fit within others. And part of that work that we would do would be to try and identify if there are contradictions or difficulties, or another policy is working against what we're trying to do. So that would have been part of the policy development route that we would have gone down.
Right. Thank you. The department's own stats identified that 24% of schools are not involved in sharing. In relation to obligations, in order to ensure wider and non-tokenistic participation, does the department believe that a legal obligation is required for schools to be involved in shared education?
I think the experience that we have, let's say, built up over a number of years, and also all the research would indicate that you need community support. So if we start obliging communities to go down this route, then you're going against that. And we know from our knowledge in this area, in this province, that once you start forcing people to do things, then that is when people will walk away from the position. So we would want to be encouraging and facilitating shared education as opposed to imposing shared education on communities.
Okay, thanks. Well then, in respect of employment practices in schools, the Minister previously suggested that Section 75 obligations might be extended to all schools, but that a public consultation would be required on that. Can the Department comment whether it believes a legal obligation might be usefully placed on schools to promote good relations and perhaps normalise employment practices in schools?
This was one of the recommendations that come from the Ministerial Advisory Group report, and the Ministerial Advisory Group did a lot of work, very widespread consultation process before coming up with that. It is something that does happen in other jurisdictions, and I think there have been a lot of concerns. I know some of the previous sessions that you've had, there have been concerns about the bureaucracy that would be involved. But what they have done in other jurisdictions is they have what they call, it's sometimes referred to as an equality light scheme for schools. It doesn't mean that it's light in terms of bureaucracy, as opposed to light in terms of ensuring the meet the groups. But there are other ways of actually moving this forward, and this is one of the areas that we would want to explore as part of that. The OFMDFM are in the lead on this process, and the Minister has written to the First and Deputy First Ministers to ask for their views initially in terms of moving this forward.
And when did he write to them?
He wrote to them a number of months back.
A number is 12, 24.
I don't have the exact date off the top of my head, but it's more than 6 months probably.
A reasonable amount to have expected a response.
Sure.
Okay, right, thank you very much for that. And the other aspect I wanted to touch on was sometimes you might find that schools will amalgamate or because of numbers of the schools or work closer together because of risk of closure. Is that something that you look favourably upon and would
again, the criteria, particularly for the Delivering Social Change signature project, as we work down through the policy level, obviously we set out within the individual programmes that deliver that policy more detailed criteria. So the criteria in the Delivering Social Change signature project is that schools must be sustainable, first of all. So where they are coming together in terms of shared education experience, then the expectation is that they are doing it for the right reasons. That's part of why they have to set out in their action plans. Each school individually self-assesses against the continuum model, and then they work as a partnership to see where that partnership actually sits. So we have made the process fairly robust, while making it not too bureaucratic for schools to actually follow, so that we avoid that situation, the situations you're talking about, where they're coming at it really from a point of view of that it allows them to continue to exist as a school.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I suppose just a couple of final questions we've got. Obviously been raised with us in evidence. Drumround and Methodist College have raised the issue and I suppose highlighted their own individual circumstances, and just wonder if you comment. Obviously they've raised a concern that shared education according to the definition can't really happen within, if you like, a single site or a single school, and just why there's the exclusion to require then more than one school to be involved.
I think it's back to the point that I talked about earlier, where it is about the dual aims of improving educational outcomes and as part of that, reconciliation outcomes, and that there is a lot of international evidence around the fact that when schools collaborate with another school, that they can actually raise the standards. So it's based on that evidence that a very good school can actually raise the standards of other schools and can share that with other schools as to how they've done that.
Could I say as well, you've referred to two schools and I'm not familiar with what the two schools are doing as such, but I think we would have to ask a question. If someone is saying that they are doing all of these things but is unwilling to work with somebody else, I think to be fair,
although I wasn't here for the evidence whenever they gave that, and I think it's maybe a little bit pejorative to say that they're unwilling to do that. I think what they're saying is they're providing a particular setting in which there is that mixing of the communities in relation to that, and I suppose it's simply saying why in and of itself are they being excluded from that?
Well, I think they're the skills that we need to participate. The very fact that they are doing those things makes it all the more important that they participate. As Andrew said, I think whether it is educational attainment, whether it's reconciliation outcomes, or whether it's both, a stronger school working with a school that is in need of support and needs to improve and recognises the need to improve will always, to a certain extent, pull up what is happening in the other school, and hopefully that school will be able to take credit for the support that it has provided.
As well, if you look at the practicalities of the Delivering Social Change programme, the funding that is available is to assist with transport, to provide substitute cover. I think Andrew made reference to that before. It is funding to facilitate inter-school collaboration, which is recognised as having additional costs over and above a school's LMS budget. So a school on its own will not incur those type of costs in the very good work that it's doing by itself.
Final question, I think, Trevor, you have a question on the Moy situation of the shared campus.
Oh, well, I'm not going to go down to the Moy again. The question was about the measurement of educational societal benefit under shared education schemes, but I think you've answered it at least 3 times, so you're off the hook.
Thank you.
On that note, thank you for your evidence. Maybe worthwhile. I mean, we've just a couple of bits to clear up here, but because it may be useful for you to hear this, just in relation to that. We've obviously got a 2-stage process in relation to this. There's specifically the, I think we alluded to this before you arrived. Obviously, there's a specific inquiry report which will begin to be sort of drafted with a view to, if we can get agreement on that for debate before the summer recess. But we're also acutely aware that, given circumstances, that the Department is hoping to take the legislative situation to the Executive. To that extent, obviously, we're keen to be helpful for that information. What I suggested earlier, and I suspect given the time frame, probably given the amount of time we've got today, but if members, I suppose, if they can send in any thoughts or initial thoughts, because we want to give probably an initial view to the Department, if they can email the Secretariat, email Peter in particular, with any thoughts on that. The aim, I suppose, would be that hopefully next week we would have something drafted, so that we could give an initial view, whether it's a sort of a 1-page or 2-page bit to the Department.
This is in terms of the bill, Chair?
This is in terms of the bill specifically in that regard.
Would be helpful.
We can be helpful within that, and hopefully maybe agree sort of a line then that we can get to the Department, which would be useful sort of at next week's meeting. Nelson, will you sort of look at this?
I was just thinking that phrase, very qualified. There's a lot to be said for the old Community Relations Council model about equality, diversity and interdependence. The 3-legged stool is a simple way of expressing what I think's in there.
Okay. As I said, we'll ask members if they have thoughts to get that to the clerk, so that we can have something drafted next week, hopefully in that regard, and possibly even hopefully something agreed. But maybe that's naivety of the honeymoon period in that regard. So thank you for your forbearance. Obviously, we've been 2 hours worth, so there's a lot of meat within this, and I suspect this may be stage 1 of a number of stages within this. And that, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, folks, we'll move on then to any other business. Does anybody have any other business? Robin?
Right, Chair, just before Jonathan left, he asked me if I would raise a number of questions for sending on to the Minister. They're to do with study. I'll pass them over to you.
Okay, well, perhaps that, but
I'll just
vaguely then to deal with about study leave and issues around, I suppose, teacher support within that sort of in the broader context. So.
Write to DE.
We could write to DE. I can read out the full bit. And at present, Year 12, is this, by the way, is this Jonathan's handwriting rather than yours, or what?
It's Jonathan's handwriting.
It is all, to be fair.
It's in capitals.
Yeah. Not put out the spelling mistake. They, at present, Year 12 in schools are on 7 weeks study leave. I suppose we want to find out what the guidelines in terms of study leave are. Can children be forced to stay at home? Does this apply to children who have coursework to do and need school support? Can pupils with a statement and classroom support be sent home and lose this support for a 7-week period? And what is expected of the teachers classroom assistants for this 6-week period? I'll give a full bit, but in terms of that, members happy enough for us to try and bite off to the Department? I suspect the hallmarks of something that's quite, in one sense, quite specific, but to be fair, they've been couched in general terms, and that, but so it's not obviously dealing with a.
I'm not quite clear why he doesn't just ask the questions himself, you know.
Well, maybe he's looking to just get it directly back, but I think it seems a reasonable enough request on that side of things. Okay. Members agreed with that. Any other business,
okay.
Sandra?
Can I just raise another issue of the voluntary redundancy scheme? And I don't know if other members are here in the same schools are still a bit up in the air about the funding of that.
Yeah, we had,
and
Sandra, I think it's possible before you'd arrived.
Okay.
There was, we've been told, which we are, there is grave concerns in terms of the, on the tabled items, that what initially we've been told seems to be very low, well, quite a slow processing, I think would maybe be the way to put it. Now, we're told that we are due to get more information from the department within the next day or so on it, but we've agreed earlier on to write to the department to sort of, I suppose, highlight concerns about seeking clarity on the impact of any sort of delays, because obviously very specifically there's the issue that particularly on the teaching staff side of it, it is a very different position from almost anything else in the public sector, because there's specific time frames that there's got to be given if there's going to be those voluntary redundancies, and that impacts obviously both the individuals and on the schools. And I think we'd be grave concern over the delay of processing.
Do we know the funding allocated to that? Is that not up in the air still?
I think, Chair, as discussed earlier, the Public Sector Transformation Fund, what had been indicated previously was that allocation was dependent on agreement of a 15-16 budget.
Yeah.
And
That's all.
better than me, that is not agreed. Therefore, there is no Public Sector Transformation Fund yet.
So it still all hangs on welfare reform.
I think the problem on it is there seems to be twofold. One is the wider context of the welfare reform situation. But even given that, there does seem to be a concern over the way the department has broadly speaking handled the issue from a processing point of view. When we see, if you take a sort of a comparison, I think from the, for instance, in DFP in terms of the civil service scheme, they got a large number of applications in, and presumably are in the process of processing those. But there seems to be a particular delay within the department, and there seems to be then obviously a particular additional problem, which is, I think, if teachers are to be let go from a redundancy point of view from the 1st of September, they need to be notified, I think, by the 1st of June. If not, then there could be further problems down the line. Yeah. But we've agreed we're going to try to seek clarification from the department, and it may well be, depending upon what response we get from them, we may then need departmental officials in front of us on that as well. But I suppose we can't second judge that until we get. And as I said, we've got some indications that they will have updated figures or updated information to us that should be coming imminently in that regard. But whether that eases the problem or whether it simply leaves us in a slightly better clarified, similar sort of problem, it remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay, folks, if there's no other business, the next committee meeting is scheduled to be at the Care Special School in Lurgan at 10 a.m. And so I'll put the question that the committee does now adjourn. Committee's adjourned.
Chair, thanks, members. Well done. Well done.